Hi, this is Yury Li-Toroptsov, and you're listening to Image is Psyche, a podcast dedicated to our fantasy lives. On today's program, I would like to talk about a place that I've been discovering and exploring bit by bit as I go on with my studies at the CG Jung Institute in Zurich. I'm going to talk about the picture archives. I'm a certified professional coach and a visual artist. So I'm not a stranger to images and working with images. For example, I draw my own dreams now for a couple of years. But I also introduced image analysis into my coaching clients' processes. I find it very helpful, for instance, to visualize certain blockages or issues that the client might have and present them as images. Or sometimes, for instance, I invite my clients to tell me a dream. If there was during this process, there's an important dream, which is an image, a mental image, that they remember. So we can start dialoguing with the dream. What exactly is the image? What's the representation? What it stands for? So image work has been of interest to me for quite some time now, I should say. So when I learned that there was a picture archive at the Jung Institute in Zurich, I was very intrigued. But before we go into the archive, let me talk about how the process, the teaching, the study, the training process is organized at the Institute. So we're not there all the time. We attend classes in three distinct blocks during the year. So 3 times a year we get together. And this is a very kind of privileged moment because most of us are away from our regular lives. I live and work in Paris, so each time I go to Zurich for 3 full weeks, I find myself in a very kind of special time-space capsule because I'm away from my routine, I'm away from the city that I know. I find myself in this environment, which is very connected to nature because Küsnacht, the suburbs of Zurich, it's where the institute is located. It's a very picturesque place located right on the shore of Lake Zurich. So finding yourself in such peaceful and mindful location, it's very propitious to self-exploration, self-reflection. And self-reflection and self-explorations and self-analysis actually are very important pillars of training at the Institute. But then also you are exposed to a community of like-minded people who find themselves in various stages of their training. Some are beginning, some are advancing and moving into diploma stage, some are writing something. So we're all moving at our own pace, but then finding each other during this 3 weeks, 3 times a year, it's very rewarding because we talk, we exchange. So it's a very special place. And when I learned that there was a picture archive, which strangely enough is located on the 3rd floor, which is the top floor of the Institute, right across from the student room, so basically fairly accessible, I really wanted to explore this. I wanted to to visit it. And such opportunity presented to me now 2 years ago for the first time. So at the time, I took a seminar on imagination and creative process, which was given by Ruth Aman. Ruth Aman was, unfortunately, she passed away last year, was a very illustrious Jungian who has written many things, many books which are now a reference, and notably a book on sand play therapy. You know, she was a big expert on that, and she trained with Dora Koff, and someone with a tremendous amount of experience. So when this seminar was announced, I was so happy that I got in. And during that seminar, Ruth presented several clinical cases. And very often those clinical cases were images. And there was a couple of cases coming from what she called a picture archive, of which she was a curator at the time. So we talked, you know, each time a clinical case is presented to the audience, you know, we're practicing our own skill of looking at images and trying to penetrate, you know, the meaning. And so there's the whole technique, but then there's also, you know, your own experience that comes into stage. What do you feel? How do you feel? And all that. So we finished our seminar, but I was really curious, and I wanted to see the originals of the images that Ruth presented during the seminar. You know, one thing is to see a reproduction of a picture, and the other thing is, in fact, to see the original. And Ruth, I must say, was very forward, sort of coming out and saying, you people, you need to go and see the stuff at the archives, the picture archives. It's not far. Make an appointment and come and see me, which I did. So, and this was the first occasion on which I knocked on the door of the picture archives at the CG Jung Institute in Zurich. This wasn't my first experience with the archives. As a visual artist, 10 years ago exactly, I did an artist residency on the island of Jersey with the picture archive of the Société Jersiaise. So I had access to this amazing depository of historical photographs, and I created my own project in resonance with that archive. This is where I found and had a chance to look at some of the originals of Claude Cahun, which is an important now artist, a photographer. So archives for me, from the very beginning, it's about images, it's about stories, but it's also about memory. So it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of dive into the material and explore all these dimensions. So what about the picture archives at the CG Jung Institute Zurich? Well, I'm not clearly the right person to talk about the objectives and the mission of the archive. I'm a user. I'm a simple user of the archives, and I would like to share simply my experience of it. But from what I understand, the mission of the archive is to support the research into the interpretation of images and the archetypal symbolism. And it's a unique place to do that. So there are several collections of pictures that the archive contains. First of all, there's an archive of images of Jung's patients. So it's about 4,500 images, which represents roughly 50 clinical cases. And then there's 6,000 images of the patient art from a Jungian analyst, Yolando Jacobi. She was an important Jungian, first generation Jungian, and she played a role in establishing the Jung Institute in 1948. There are other collections which also constitute an integral part of the archives, but I'm not going to mention them. I'll focus just on these two. So as you could understand now, these picture archives contain patient art. In itself, it's not a unique enterprise and it's not a unique place, because such archives, such collections, they exist elsewhere in the world. For instance, in other places in Switzerland, in Germany, there's at least one in Paris. But Jung's Institute archive has one nuance that makes it special in a way. Because we know that most of patient art that collected by psychiatric clinics or hospitals contains art created by the patients. So normally when you are a resident of a clinic or a hospital, it's a different way of expressing things in images. First, you might not have a free and very unobstructed access to materials. You might have to use materials that are given to you. You don't have your own choice of materials, which is the case with Jung's patients, because they were not hospitalized. Jung opened his practice in 1909 at his Seestrasse newly built house. So those people were, in a different stage of development. They were exploring their psyches. They were coming to see Jung from all over the world, of course. And Jung himself was encouraging them to do that, and actually showed and shared his own way of working with images. One of the patients says that when she would come to see Jung for her analytical hour, in the study, in the consulting room, she would see Jung's red book on display, standing on an easel and open. And sometimes Jung would say, "Oh, hey, let me show you something, what I'm doing." So he was very sort of open about his own process. So that's what makes it this collection so unique. And so the problems, the issues that might be relevant to the residents of psychiatric hospitals are not exactly the same for people who are exploring their psyche on their own terms. And then, of course, for researchers of Jung's work, the archive offers a unique opportunity to see some of the cases that Jung describes in his collected works. So now we know that it was Jung who encouraged his patients to engage in creative dialogue with themselves, and that the first pictures appearing in the archive are dated 1917. So my first visit to the archives was related to my desire to see the originals that Ruth Amann showed us in clinical cases in her seminar. It was a case 039. So we know that the identity of some of Jung's patients is now known, but all the art, or at least the art that I looked at, presented in the archive, has a code number. The identity of the patient is concealed. So when Ruth Amann brought to the reading room the case 039 for me to look through, it was very special to to open that box and get in touch with that material, because I knew that Jung looked at it, he worked with it. The patient himself, or actually in this case herself, spent a considerable time creating those pictures, because those pictures were quite spectacular. They were really, I would probably say, even a museum quality stuff. And what really impressed me is, of course, the artistry and the pictures, but also the technique. Some of the images that I looked at were 100 years old, but they looked so fresh, as if they were painted only, I don't know, a year ago or now. So I was asking myself, what makes it look so fresh and so well preserved? And then I realized it's actually the medium, and the medium with which this person chose to paint is gouache. Unlike watercolor, gouache creates opaque pigmentation, and this opacity conserves the pigments and conserves the thick layer of pigment, and which actually goes very well with the time. It's so, the blues are blue, the reds are red. It's so vibrant. Unlike watercolors, watercolor is about transparency. So watercolors, they kind of lost their shine, and you also see the paper that got a little bit yellowish. It adds to this kind of very archival, very antique look. And gouache, no, not at all. It looks so fresh. So I was thinking to myself, I would probably like now to paint my dreams in gouache. I mean, not that I want them to end up in an archive of sorts, but somehow this notion spoke to me, and guess what? Since then, I am painting my dreams in gouache. As I mentioned before, this patient in the case 039 clearly possesses artistic abilities. So her pictures are very well painted, preserved, composed. The use of color is extremely fine, and the compositions are very elaborate, I would say. But this makes me think that in order to engage this creative dialogue with ourselves, we do not need to be artists. This is just sort of the highest example of what an artist who actually can paint or was trained to paint, what they can do. But this is almost the opposite of what creativity is. Creativity is really an innate quality of our psyche, of any psyche. So everybody can be creative. So creative means playful. So you don't have to be an artist to engage into this dialogue. And some of the cases I was told in the archive about that, there's a lot of very simple imagery, which is difficult to classify and to work with if you don't know the context. But this doesn't matter. If you're looking to establish this inner dialogue with yourself, do not be afraid, and do not censor yourself and saying like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing. Just get yourself a block of paper, get yourself whatever medium, get yourself a packet of gouache. That can be very expensive, so we might start with watercolor, or I don't know, with colored pencils, and do it, and start, doodling. That's already a great beginning. Because looking at these clinical cases, you can get a little bit intimidated how versatile and how skillful this person was. Another realization I had while looking at this case 039 was that even though the person painted these pictures almost like 100 years ago, that material was still psychoactive. By psychoactive, it means it does something to the viewer. It's like, like those rocks that keep radiation going on years and years after they were mined. It's the same thing. You feel the power of the psyche. You realize that the material that this person was portraying, they were not just flowers, they were not just trees or faces, they were symbols. And those symbols are very potent. Those symbols, they still keep working. And as somebody who's working on my own symbols, I could recognize some of those. I mean, they're very individual. What that person had a symbol is very different to me or to anybody else. But there is this kind of archetypal layer on which all these symbols may actually cross, and you feel that years after this have been drawn and presented and hidden and talked about, it's still active. Another thing that I enjoyed and liked, and it was a little tip for me as well, was that the person who made those drawings, on the back of those drawings, she would write things. She would write either a piece of the dream to which this drawing is referring to, or a thought, or a piece of conversation that she might have with the analyst. In certain instances, the patient is actually talking with the analyst, because she would be really writing as if a small letter on the back of it. It's what it does. I think it allows first the person who does that to remember and sort of to give more context to the image, and to remember at what point of their process this image came to be. Because image is an important expression of psyche, but sometimes over time, if we're not cataloging it in a way, we forget what's it referred to, and that part kind of sinks back into the unconscious. So this juxtaposition between text and visual, I found it very interesting, and annotating, giving context with the text is helpful. But it is difficult to look at other people's images and not having the keys or the context to be able to decode and see the full meaning of it. That said, looking at any kind of image, there are elements, for instance, the subject matter or the composition, that can, if we look at that carefully, we can probably see some of the corresponding stages of the psychic development. The second time I got the privilege to visit the picture archive was actually again because of my curiosity, but this time I didn't have any particular case I wanted to look at. So I made an appointment. The person in charge let me in, and she asked me, "So what do you want to see?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know what I want to see." So we concluded together that the curator would open the vaults filled with boxes, and art and everything of the archive. And I would just go and pick whatever box that would look at me, and that would be the research, for the day. And that's exactly what happened. So she opened the archive, and I just took one box, and she took it out, and when she did, I saw written on that box mandalas. In Sanskrit, mandala means a sacred circle. So it's an important symbol in Jungian psychology because it's a shape that reconciles the opposites. There's a certain idea of unity of the opposites, unity of the elements. So if someone has dreams, recurring dreams, for instance, with circles and round shapes, it may signify a certain level of development. So what did I learn from my second visit to the archives? Well, first of all, in that box labeled mandalas, we found an embroidery. So if you think that the picture archive is only paintings, only drawings, well, it's not true. It also has collages, it also has some photographic images, but it also has embroidery. And the one I got to see It's absolutely stunning piece of exquisite work. I'd like to talk a little bit about this embroidery, but it's difficult to talk about an image on a podcast, right? So I would like to mention a book in which you can find the reproduction of this image. The book is called Treasures from the Archive, CG Jung Institute Zurich Küstnacht, Images Created by Patient in Analysis, 1917-1955. So it's a book edited by Ruth Amann, Verena Kast, and Ingrid Riddell. So it appeared, it was published by Analytical Psychology Press in 2023. It's an English edition that was published. An earlier edition appeared in German. So if you can get hold of that book, you will have a best of a little bit with wonderful texts written about the archive. And on page 269, you will see the embroidery that I completely came across by chance that day. So it's a blue piece of silk, and on which there's a structure, very architectural, but very organic at the same time. At the foot of the structure, there's like a small pyramid, all embroidered in different tones of blue and white. And from the ground, as if going up to the sky, there's a stem with very fine leaves, and on the very top of it, there's a flower. A flower that is blooming, different circles all around of that bloom. And there, on the flower, there sits a figure that is meditating with their eyes closed, with a beautiful reddish and purple cape all about it. So it's a very serene and meditating figure. This particular image is dated 1925, and it's called Flowering Tree. When I saw this, I immediately paid attention to this meditating figure because I remembered a dream that Jung describes in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And it's a very spooky dream in a way. And in that dream, Jung walks somewhere on a road, and he sees a chapel by the road. The door is open, so he enters the chapel. And in that chapel, he sees a meditating person with his eyes closed. And Jung realized immediately that this person or this figure meditating, he is not sleeping, but he is dreaming Jung's life. And that if Jung decides to wake this person up, it would be the end of Jung's life. So Jung quietly leaves the chapel and leaves the monk, I think it was the monk, undisturbed, thus preserving his life. Because if the monk wakes up, Jung's life will be over. So it's a very interesting way to look at our lives, that our lives are in fact someone else's dreams. And that's the feeling I got when I was looking at this embroidery. Very powerful. I had a horrible headache after this, and I was wondering, like, what is the effect? Why this headache appeared? And then I was thinking maybe some of the images that are contained in the archive are not to be seen, or you have to be ready, or you have to be prepared to see those, because, as I said again, this is psychoactive material. In volume 16 of Jung's collected works, where he talks about the purpose of psychotherapy, he asks himself a question, why he encourages his patients when they arrive at a certain stage of their development to express themselves through brushes, through color, through through painting. What is the ultimate goal for this? And he responds to this by saying that he want them to create an effect. He doesn't go what kind of effect he wants to produce, but we kind of feel that it is both an emotional effect and an intellectual effect. Because if you look at the creative act in its own, in a way, it's a combination of two small opposites. So on the one hand is the intellectual part is like, okay, I'm going to draw something that I saw or I imagined. So it's a thought, and the thought is something very volatile. It goes up, our imagination. We're carried away by those thoughts. We're carried away by those images. But when you take a brush or a pencil or a pen to capture this image, this thought, this imagination on paper, then you are directing this thought down. You're anchoring it, because the process of doing that, it's very kind of grounding. You spend times fighting, and Jung talks about it. It's a real fight between you and the paper and the composition and the choice of colors. For you to be able to find a shape that successfully represents that very elusive, very volatile image in your head is very difficult. And sometimes if you do that, you try to draw your dream, very often it's very frustrating because it's hard. It's hard to do that because it's hard to capture. It's hard to flesh out everything what we saw, because dream is very often is a feeling. But when you give it shape and when you start drawing it, you're actually grounding that feeling. You are injecting sort of reality to that feeling. And it's not always pleasant, and it takes time. So the physicality of the creative act is a notion that has been very dear to Ruth Amann. So she taught us this very often, that in sand play, it's the hands and the sand that creates something. It's the body that speaks, bypassing very often sort of the word. And in the case of patients of Jung, they were in a way imitating his own creative process. Jung is fully engaged in his interaction or confrontation with the unconscious. So the Red Book is being written and worked on at this very moment. So Jung led by example, because it's hard to imagine that suddenly, without any encouragement, spontaneously, these people, these patients of Jung, would start bringing him art, start drawing things, drawing dreams and their imaginations. So clearly Jung was behind this process. Another observation I had while looking at the patient art at the archives was that we have to be humble. That even though there is such discipline as image analysis, which allows us to look at a collective level of all those images and understand the symbolism and maybe analyze the composition and the subject matter, which might give us a false feeling that we actually see fully what's in front of us. In fact, I think it can be a trap. The rule, we cannot generalize. And this is what I find extremely moving coming in contact with patient art, is that each time, each drawing, each embroidery, each collage is a representation in the life of that particular person of this collective psyche. And each time it's a unique case, and the mystery remains. And no matter how much time we spend looking at those images. And probably the last observation I had while looking at the patient art at the Institute archives was that psyche seemed to be very low tech, that you don't need much to start this inner creative dialogue. Because now you have apps that allow you to record, to instantly transcribe, analyze, and maybe even illustrate your dreams. It's a very nifty gadget. But if you look at what Jung was saying, what really counts is not having a dream, but having that dream and actually working with that, grounding that dream, finding the references in your life and really planting it into the ground. Otherwise, it just flies away. So I was wondering if this very easy way of doing it with an app does the trick. Probably it, if this is something that you do, probably this is something that helps you start this dialogue. But I doubt that this is the extent of it. I'm sure you would want to deepen it, and maybe a brush, a pencil, and a piece of paper would be a great way to continue that. Thank you for listening. For more information about this podcast, please visit my website, toroptsov.com, where you can find previous episodes and see the presentation of my coaching practice. Thank you.